Hello everyone, welcome to the review crew, where a bunch of small content creators get together to talk about video games. On the last episode, we looked at Tetris games, and today we'll be taking a look at Pac-Man games. If you're interested in checking out any of the creators featured here, their channels are linked in the description. Also in the description is the link to the review crew Discord. If you're a reviewer who wants to be a part of this, go ahead and click the link to join the server. The review crew for next month will be Super Mario spin-offs, hosted by the man Denominator. Basically, any games that aren't these are welcome here. There will be one entry per person, due at the end of the month. This is a very open topic for review crew, so if you have any questions about your potential entry, please contact one of the admins on the Discord server. And without further ado, Pac-Man. Pac-Man. Seriously, at this point, what can be said about this absolute icon of gaming that hasn't already been said? Well, I could say how in 1979, game designer Toru Iwatani wanted to make an arcade game that could appeal to more casual audiences. A game that wasn't about violence, war, or sports. The in-game graphics and characters were made to be cute and colorful to appeal to younger players. And the design of Pac-Man himself was based on the Japanese character for mouth, Kuchi. Midway Games agreed to distribute the game in North America, and here we are, 40 years later. Now that our incredibly brief history lesson is over, let's actually talk about the game. Pac-Man is an arcade game where you eat dots and avoid ghosts. I know that sounds like an oversimplification, but it's really not. The maze stays exactly the same throughout all 200 plus levels. The only thing that really change are the speed of the ghost and how long the effects of your power pellet last. Ah yes, the power pellets. Eating those allow you to actually eat the ghosts that are chasing you. Speaking of the ghost, they all have their own names and their own methods of attempting to reach the player. Blinky, the red one, is pretty simple, it just attempts to follow you head on. Pinky, the pink one, attempts to ambush you by getting in front of you. Inky, the blue one, can be unpredictable, using the tactics that Blinky and Pinky use. And Clyde, the orange one, well, he's stupid. He's all over the place. He moves around the maze with no real pattern, which makes it all the worse when he's the one that actually kills you. The incredible success of Pac-Man in the arcades led to a lot of home console ports. Like, a lot of home console ports. You need like 20 different sets of hands to count how many. Thankfully, the game is so simple that most ports were pretty faithful to the original. I grew up playing the game on the NES and through several Namco Museum collections. It's incredible that a game so simple led to Pac-Man becoming one of the most iconic characters in all of gaming. I'm glad he's been able to stick around for so long, and hey, let's hope he doesn't go anywhere anytime soon.
Move over, Pac-Man! This is Pac-N-Pal. Pac-N-Pal is a rare arcade game released in 1983 by Namco to keep the Pac-Man name relevant. As the last relevant game in the series, Miss Pac-Man, had come out 2 years earlier and wasn't even developed by Namco. Anyways, Pac-N-Pal attempts to shake up the Pac-Man formula by adding a second main character, your pal, who steals items from you when you open an item room and delivers them to the box where the ghosts reside. The object of the game is to wait by the ghost room and have your pal drop the items so you can pick them up. An interesting thing about the game is some of the items in Pac-N-Pal are derived from other Namco games like Galaxian. When it came time to release Pac-N-Pal overseas, Midway reskinned the game as Pac-Man and Chomp Chomp and replaced the pal with Chomp Chomp from the animated Pac-Man series. The game was never released in America and only had a run of 300 machines in the UK, making it incredibly rare to come by. Pac-N-Pal was considered a commercial failure by Namco and didn't get a re-release till a little-known Namco collection released on Windows 95 in 1998. Recently, Pac-N-Pal has been included on the Pac-Man Arcade 1-Up cabinet as a bonus game, so there is hope that either Pac-N-Pal or Pac-Man and Chomp Chomp could be re-released in the future. Overall, I think Pac-N-Pal is one of the better, lesser-known Pac-Man spin-offs and should be given more recognition for trying to change the formula of the series so early into its run. It's really a shame that Pac-N-Pal hasn't gotten more recognition over the years. I do think it's a good game, it just was handled badly by being not released in Europe and everything. But I think Namco could give it a second life by making a sequel or putting it on one of the Namco Museum releases in the future. But there is one small problem with the game. It isn't a pal. I mean, he's stealing the items from you. No pal would steal items. It's just confusing and wrong, and they have to change the title or I'm suing them. Okay, bye-bye.
Hey y'all, Retro here. Some of you know me as that one team with the Alex Kidd profile picture, and yet I'm still a huge Pac-Man fan. Viewers and people in my Discord know that, yeah, I'm one big Pac-Man fan. So on today's mini review is going to be Pac-Attack on the Sega Genesis. So you ever get the idea of Tetris having a game of Pac-Man? No? Well, if you didn't, here it is. So this was an era of Namco being, so we don't know what to do with Pac-Man, so here's some games that are not Pac-Man related, but yet still has them with him. So this is a strange title and game, so presumably we all play Tetris, right? I mean, come on. While having the same idea of fill the entire line with blocks with a twist. In a random order, the game can give you a ghost and Pac-Man for each 3 blocks you get. This is what has a differentiation than what Tetris has. I found this game to be easy, but like Tetris, as it hasn't been said before, easy to learn, hard to master. I like this game a lot. In fact, I like this game so much, I bought 6 different copies of it for each different console. I'm not kidding. Yeah, kind of off topic, but I've got all 6 other copies, all which with some features missing and some with puzzling actions, which leads me into the puzzle mode. A fun but yet simple mode, filled with 400 levels. Didn't play through at all, but take my word for it. Overall, this is a simple Tetris clone, and I mentioned other versions of this game. That said, ports are mostly made of the Genesis version, or has music retained for them for some reason. Which means the GBA, PS2, Xbox 360 are just a Sega Genesis port for some reason. While thinking about it, why does Pac-Man World 2 has its own Pac-Attack port, which is a PS1, adds its own version itself? I'm thinking too hard about this. Go buy the game, it's decent overall, 10 out of 10, too much water.
Fury of the Furries is a puzzle platformer revolving around some pissed off looking puffles trying to save some bloke. The title was developed by Callisto and published by Mindscape in 1993. It was made available on different platforms, though for the purposes of this video I'll be primarily looking at the DOS version. And while this game isn't talked about nearly as much nowadays, it still seems like it's gained a bit of a cult following over the years. Though, before I get too much into the history, let's jump into the game proper. In the game itself, you control these little guys named Tinies. Each of them possess a unique special power that you can utilize. Whether that be yellows punching, greens swinging, reds munching, or blues swimming. The game consists of about 8 or so worlds divided into 10 levels each. However, getting through these worlds is quite challenging to say the least. Whether it be getting used to the game's physics or trying to figure out what you need to do in order to progress. Trying to traverse the Tinies through some of these stages was admittedly a bit frustrating at points. Though despite these factors, the game still manages to be fun. Taking your time and having patience is definitely key to getting through some of these stages. I know it may be easy to bum rush, and I know I sort of did the same thing as well. Though I definitely think it's worth it considering how unique the game is. Plus to give you enough time to get through these stages. However, that would not be the end of Fury. As in the mystical year of 1994, a reskin of the game was released entitled Pac-Time. This version of Fury actually focuses on not Pac-Man, but Pac-Boy. It's been virtually untouched aside from some graphics and music. Though surprisingly, they also made some quality of life tweaks. Stuff like having a dedicated button to select between powers, instead of having to manually press down to select characters. Omitting the death animations completely despite how cool they looked. And saving after every level actually goes a long way. Definitely the definitive version of playing Fury, despite the fact that it doesn't look nearly as cool as Fury itself. Though since I'm still here, I want to bring up 2 other games that are related to Fury. First, there's Pac-Time for Game Boy. It's pretty cool if you want some on-the-go action of Fury. And there's the SNES game of Pac-Time, though, which is actually its own thing. Despite what some people have said, I thought it was okay. Even with the larger sized characters, I thought the ability to jump was kinda nice. And I also like the addition of the ghost monsters from the Pac-verse. Though, at the end of the day, Fury has definitely had its influence on the Pac series as a whole. If you're interested in giving it a try, it's definitely worth a look.
In the mid-90s, Namco wanted to make an effort to re-release their old games on newer hardware and push this relatively new genre of re-releasing older games. They were pioneers in the retro game compilation, and the Namco Museum series still succeeds to this day. Namco wanted to introduce the younger generation to their classic arcade games and keep these games relevant and successful throughout the years. And hey, it worked. I'm still talking about Pac-Man 40 years after it released. They started this effort with the release of the first Namco Museum on November 22nd, 1995. Here's the thing, there was a Namco game compilation released only in Japan on that same day. Not too many mention it, but also on November 22nd, 1995, Namco Classic Collection Volume 1 hit Japanese arcades with a lot of praise. It contained Galaga, Xevious, and Mappy all in one board with arrangements on each game. These were modern versions of the games that took everything great about the originals and shook things up to create some pretty stellar titles. I wouldn't call these games remakes, they're more in line with something like Sonic Mania, with their new take on retro games and a fresh look. Reportedly, it was rather difficult for the team to port the original arcade games from the 80s to the new hardware, and thus development took longer than anticipated. The team spent some of the extra time working on the soundtracks for the arrangement games, and that shows. These tunes are solid and the sound effects are on point. With the big success of this machine, of course, Namco had to make a sequel, and what do you know, they did. A month after Namco Museum Volume 2 dropped, Japan got Namco Classic Collection Volume 2 in arcades in March of 1996. This one has Pac-Man, Rally X, and Dig Dug. And out of all three of these arranged titles, Pac-Man Arrangement is by far the best, and I'll tell you why. Pac-Man Arrangement is a new take on the original Pac-Man, and it does quite a bit different. The most it strays away from the original is that it has an ending. Yes, this game has 5 worlds with 4 stages and a boss battle. Well, 6 if you count World 0, which is like a warm-up/tutorial world. World 1 is called Retro World, and it's a callback to the original Pac-Man game. Next is Water World. No, not the terrible movie. This one is like Coral Reef themed, I guess. Then we have Green World, which is kinda just like Water World, but there's dirt and grass. The Ancient Ruins world is pretty neat. It's like going through a pyramid of sorts. Finally, you get to the monster's secret base, and it's all metallic and robotic themed. I really like the look of this one. So we got a new ghost too, and his name is Kinky. Sure, this game had no input from the US, I guess. So this ghost is pretty unique. His gimmick is that when he's floating around the board, he is a moving power pellet. But when he collides with another ghost, he'll power them up, and each ghost has different abilities like mirroring and being able to create more dots to eat. Pac-Man can also eat several different pills that will give him powers similar to the ghosts. This game has infinite continues, so it can be experienced as a full adventure of sorts. And in my opinion, that's the best way to play. Running through the whole game takes a little over 20 minutes, but it is just one of the most enjoyable gaming experiences you can have. Throughout my whole playthrough, I couldn't help but have a smile on my face, and when I beat the final boss, I immediately beat the game again. It's that good. Overall, it's a well-designed game, and the soundtrack just oozes that mid-90s arcade charm, with its energetic riffs and instruments, along with the beautiful high-bit sprites and backgrounds. Namco knew they had something good on their hands, so they remade the game for the GBA as a part of Pac-Man Collection in 2001. This is how I and many others discovered the game, and I gotta say, this is pretty much arcade perfect aside from the scrolling screen. But the difficulty is about the same except for the final boss. That's kinda brutal on this version. But overall, this port is very impressive, especially for it being part of a compilation. Pac-Man Collection is worth it for arrangement alone, and you also get the original arcade release, Pac-Attack, and Pac-Mania, which are all pretty competent for GBA. The original arcade version of Pac-Man Arrangement was also included in the Namco Museum release for the 6th generation of consoles in 2002. There it is pretty much identical to the arcade version, except the music is higher pitched, and I can't tell you why. There was even a Pac-Man Arrangement remake in 2005 for the PSP. This is a completely different game. This is awful! In conclusion, you should play Pac-Man Arrangement. It's a fun twist on the Pac-Man formula, and by far my favorite game in the series. Emulate it on MAME, or pick up a copy of Namco Museum 2002, or even Pac-Man Collection. If you're a fan of Pac-Man, arcade games, or just games in general, I highly recommend Pac-Man Arrangement to you. It's just pure fun.
Evolution is a necessary thing in the world of gaming. If you keep doing the same things over and over again, you're bound to become stale and lose sight of what made you great in the first place. This is why the 5th generation of gaming featured so many 3D platformers. It was an attempt to breathe new life into a lot of series. Out of all these attempts to turn games into 3D, I always felt like Pac-Man pulled it off pretty well. In 1999, to celebrate Pac-Man's 20th anniversary, they released Pac-Man World exclusively for the PlayStation 1. It's more of a 2.5D platformer, but it has lots of elements of the original arcade game, and I think that's why it was so successful. It felt familiar, it felt like Pac-Man. It had a story with cutscenes, but it didn't try to be more than what it needed to be. The cutscenes were short, sweet, and simple, and pretty funny. Our villain Talkman is basically trying to get rid of Pac-Man, and kidnaps all his friends and family, so you have to try to stop him. It's really that simple. It tried something new without taking too big of a risk, and it proved very successful, doing incredibly well financially and critically. A sequel was only inevitable. Pac-Man World 2 is one of my favorite games of all time. Not only is it a true 3D platformer, but it has great levels, a wonderful soundtrack, and good graphics, baby. Everything about the game is amazing. And yes, I know I often tend to look at this game with rose-tinted glasses, but even through a more critical lens, I still think it's fantastic. The levels are nice and open, and the game encourages players to look around and explore. The controls feel great. Pac-Man moves exactly as you'd expect him to. There's this perfect weight to him, and it makes it very easy to perform jumps and land accurately. It keeps the simplistic nature of Pac-Man games and expertly brings it to the 3rd dimension. Yeah, the game still has cutscenes and it has a plot, but it works incredibly well. On that note, cutscenes, like in World 1, are very enjoyable. The story is nice and compact. It ups the stakes compared to the first game, but it still stays within the realm of fun Pac-Man shit. World 2 did way better than the first game. Better sales due to it being on multiple platforms, and better review scores because it improved on everything the first game did. It was obvious. Pac-Man World 3 needed to happen. Well, it happened, and it definitely didn't have the reception Namco is probably hoping for. Pac-Man World 3 is really polarizing. Being developed by a different team leads to a lot of the fundamental design of the game feeling like it hasn't taken any steps forward from Pac-Man World 2, rather taking many steps back. For example, this game does something that I cannot stand 3D platformers doing, and has too much of an emphasis on mediocre combat. Too many times you are stopped dead in your tracks to fight a bunch of enemies, and fighting enemies is not fun because the combat is clunky and repetitive. On top of that, there is too much of a focus on the story. The cutscenes go on for way too long, and the dialogue during levels drags. It's a slog going through this game, and it leads me to not caring all that much about it. The levels are way too big, and there's nothing to really do in them. It feels like you're just wandering around and wasting your time. Actually, that's a good way to describe this game as a whole. A waste of time. The reception to this game was very mixed. Critics said it wasn't anything too remarkable, and fans disliked how it strayed away from the other two games. Overall, a pretty poor showing for the big guy's 25th anniversary. Due to the lackluster reception of World 3, we haven't seen any other World games since. Sure, there's been other games that have borrowed elements from this series, but it's been 15 years since a proper Pac-Man World game. I'm still hoping for a Trilogy remaster at some point, but I'm not holding my breath.
Pac-Man World is one of those series that I always hear everyone rave about, but I never had some childhood connection to them. But I do enjoy them. It's cool that we got 3D platformers with Pac-Man, and I hope we eventually see a 4th one and not whatever this ghostly adventurous filth is. Anyway, back to the Pac-Man World series. So why did I want to play them on home consoles that it originally mainly designed for? Disgusting. I want to take my Pac-Man World experience on the go. Sure, I could be a loser and emulate them on my phone, but that's lame. So why not try to find versions of Pac-Man World I can legally, take on the go, and not get beaten up by Namco for playing. First up is the GBA port of Pac-Man World 1. The first game was released on the PS1. While the GBA wasn't weak for its time as a handheld, it certainly wasn't as powerful as the PS1. PS1 games were also larger in file size, so how did they do it? Well, the only boss is now the final boss, now the cutscenes are static images instead of videos, there's no factory levels, the graphics look pretty bad, every world only has one low quality song each, and 2 bonus modes were cut. But they didn't stop there. No, they had to also make it control badly for some reason. Pac-Man just feels so poor to control in this game. His controls in the air feel off and imprecise completely. It just feels like I don't always have full control. And honestly, the bad controls mean that there's no reason to touch the sport because of them. If you really want to play Pac-Man World, just wait until you get home. The pain and agony this port causes you isn't worth it. Another Pac-Man PS1 game called Miss Pac-Man Maze Madness also got ported to GBA, but that's not World, so we don't care even if the original game it's a port of is a great game. Well, if World 1's GBA port was bad, what does that mean for World 2's GBA port? Since we go from a PS1 game to a GameCube, PS2, and Xbox game. Clearly the World 2 port would need to be heavily reworked, right? So is it similar to the GBA port of World 1? Well, you start off with a ton of logos, and you get the opening cutscene, it's still static images. Maybe should they just recreate the cutscenes using in-game assets or something and make it unique. Anyway, we get into the map and oh man, this sprite work looks great. It's probably just for the world map though. I'm sure in the normal stages it looks awful. Wait a second. This is beautiful! Yeah, it's this game's best quirk, the graphics. The sprite work here is detailed and I love it. Pac-Man is constantly expressive and showing emotions whenever something happens. The world around him is also colorful and vibrant. They also fixed the biggest issue with the original game. Pac-Man controls pretty well in my opinion. Everything feels how it should. The physics are solid too. Nothing feels janky. But the game has a fatal flaw. I hate the perspective it's from. It's still a platformer, but you can also walk backwards and forwards, so it's kind of from a weird angle. It leads to this problem where I can't always tell where something is in relation to me. It feels like when I walk into stuff I should be collecting it. But it turns out I'm slightly off, but it's hard to tell that. The perspective problem also led to me missing some jumps too, not being able to fully see the distance or where I'd land. So I ended up playing it just super safe and always jumping right at the edge of a platform. And it doesn't feel clear that I can walk through some stuff, so I end up having to push against walls and squint. Also, the enemy placement in the second level felt weird. I hit this enemy with a rev roll and I was bounced off and died. Even though it looked like that's what I was supposed to do there. You also have to backtrack a ton if you want to get this one fruit. Why? Why is there backtracking in my Pac-Man game? 2020's weird, but I didn't think it'd be so weird I'd have to say that. It's not awful, but it could be better if it was just a standard 2D platformer. Everything in this port is just okay. Feels like a unique game in some ways, so I do feel weird calling it a port though. I would easily consider this the best of the GBA ports. Now I consider it worth taking a look at. Next up we move to the more modern hardware, the PSP. The PSP has a decently powerful system for the time, so it should be able to run the games well, right? Well, we got to find out when Pac-Man World 3 was ported to the PSP. It's a pretty good port, honestly. If you want to play Pac-Man World 3 on the go, you can. The main thing is, of course, it's not going to look as good. Other than that, it's actually not a bad way to play Pac-Man World 3. At the time, it was probably insanely impressive to be able to fully take a PS2 platformer on the go with you. So that was cool, but it wasn't really interesting for you guys, I bet. I mean, after all, I only got 118 words out of that. But Pac-Man World 3 has to carry on the tradition of having a weird port, right? Well, of course it does, dear viewers. May I present to you the magnum opus of Pac-Man World ports, the DS port of 3. The DS could do Mario 64, so I guess Namco decided that it could do Pac-Man World 3, which is a whole generational leap. This port is downgraded and messy. It's low resolution because it's the DS, it wasn't super powerful. You have to use a D-pad, it's just full of technical flaws and also not telling you its mechanics. Nothing here should work, and it indeed doesn't, but that's what makes it so beautiful in a way. You just gotta keep playing to see how it can get worse until you give up in frustration after you finally give in after how bad it is. And I love that.
I got a fever, and the only prescription is more Pac-Man!
The game I chose today for this video is Pac-Man Fever on the GameCube, released in 2002 as a party game in the same vein as the Mario Party series, which was actually released a month after this one. It was developed by Mass Media Games, who would go on to make Mafia 3, which is probably the best gumbo pot stirring simulator you'll ever play, and unlike that puny Mario franchise, our character roster was loaded. You got Pac-Man, you got Miss Pac-Man, you got King Boomy, and the rest. Now, this game does differ quite a bit from the Mario Party series. In those games, the board is never linear and the only way to win is to collect as many stars or coins as possible. Pac-Man Fever is different, but I'm not sure if it's in the best ways. See, instead, this game is set up so that the first person to cross the finish line wins, even though on the way you can still get tokens from playing certain mini games and hitting certain spots on the board. However, upon playing it a few times, I found the overall game to take way too long. My first game, where the computer hilariously picked every character except either Pac-Being, took about an hour to complete, and not gonna lie, it was not the most engaging hour. For one, the fact that the tokens barely do shit to help you win is kind of frustrating, considering how many times you get them, and how many times you actually get to use them. When you hit this spot, you can choose to either get a raffle ticket to unlock games and other items at the very end to play separately, choose to move forward 2 squares, or even choose to send other characters back a few squares. Oh, by the way, I love how this animation of everyone retreating looks less like, "Aw, darn, I got sent back," and more like, "Oh my god, I just want to fucking go home and play Smash." So the only way you can really advance is if you do well in the mini games here, and they're kind of a mixed bag. For one, they give you the most vague instructions on how to play them. As an example, let's look at how to play this Go Fish game. Wow, thanks for clearing that up. Here I was gonna go see how many cakes I could bake. This easily could have been remedied by clearer instructions or, like Mario Part 4 did, a preview of what the game looks like or how it plays. And yeah, maybe only Mario Party did that, and maybe they didn't want to bite too much off it, but like, still, I kind of like knowing whether or not I suck at the game or if the game itself sucks. Okay, because that whole entire thing can fuck with you, especially if this is the first review for a video game you've written in more than 6 years and you don't want to fuck this up. I promise I'm a gamer, I swear. As for the other mini games, well, they're about 30, spread out across the 3 boards. 1 tropical, 1 sci-fi, and 1 medieval. Here's all the ones I wanted to highlight. Jungle Jog, a race where you have to jump over obstacles and tap A to run faster until you either run out of stamina or the game decides, hey, no, that's far enough. Tiki Shootout, control the most sensitive target in the history of gaming as you try to hit a board in the distance before the AI can. Just like Go Fish, if you miss by a pixel, it doesn't count. Balloon Blast, move your left stick around like a madman and pray to God none of these little things make it into the goal. Peer Pressure, tap A to blow as hard as this fucking game does. Spoiler, it's impossible. Disc Duel, the game that walked so that Tron Evolution could run. And then trip on its face, but that's another conversation. Honestly, this is one of the more fun mini games I came across. It's brainless, but it's a decent time. And Card Dash is also another really fun game. Collect fruit and experience cartoonishly janky physics that are still more functional than any of the crew games. With the medieval map, this is kind of where they got lazy though. For example, Fool's Hockey is literally the exact same thing as Balloon Blast, but with a medieval skin rather than a tropical one. Market Mall, literally just Tiki Shootout, but with a medieval skin instead of a tropical one. Cannon Tacto, okay, they're not even trying with these fucking names anymore, good lord. But yeah, regardless, it's a fun game, and it's actually one that they throw at you more than once. And yes, it is important to note that, because the other issue that I have is that the way the game cycles through mini games is very unbalanced, and it can pull up the exact same games frequently before pulling up a new one. Finally, and this is super nitpicky, but the music. Honestly, it might not have been too bad if they let the tracks play out for just a little bit longer. What's worse is that you can even hear the track looping back to the beginning. It's very frustrating to see a game have such sloppy audio though. Imagine how tired we are. Imagine how tired we are a bit.
Look what you've done.
Pac-Man. You know it's serious because it's all in capitals. This piece of work is the first thing to come up when I search Pac-Man on the App Store. So to avoid confusion, I'll give this game the title of Pac-Man on Mobile. Booting it up, it becomes very apparent that this is a mobile game. Now, I can't say I was expecting much more, but all our favorite mobile game tropes are here. Like, take this menu. What is going on here? All I see is nothing but buttons upon buttons all sprawled out across a black void. I guess I shouldn't judge a book by its cover, but I'm bored. The gameplay of Pac-Man on mobile is Pac-Man, alright? You just have to swipe your finger in the direction you want to go. iPhones, am I right? Also, another weird thing I noticed is that instead of having 3 lives, you get 5. So, other than that, there's not much else to say about Pac-Man on mobile. It's actually really boring. But, is this game good? Hey, do you really expect me to waste my time coming up with an opinion that will get approved by the Pac-Man iPhone community? Let's read some App Store reviews. Love it. Tired of these money grabs. Pretty good game. Good, but why does it sell my information? Well, that's it, folks. That's Pac-Man on mobile. Now, if you want to watch a better Pac-Man review, I hear there's one coming right after this.
Previously on Review Crew. If your device can't play some form of Tetris, can you even say it really exists?
What's up?
Well, I do play Tetris now, so technically I do exist, as long as I don't stop playing. Oh, my back. What happened? Oh, must be back in my dimension. Why am I thinking about Tetris? Oh, greetings, Earth. My name is Nadominator. You'll never believe this. I was just in a dimension where a guy named Dan, who looks exactly like me, reviews mostly good video games and goes around saying things like, "Hello, world." Who does that? Well, now that I'm back here, I guess I might as well get back to doing what I do best, reviewing mostly bad games. It seems like our dimension got stuck with a bunch of stinkers. Whatever, I've got plenty of games to review here, like this one overturned 3DS game that I got a few weeks ago at a pawn shop for like $5. I don't know. Seems Dan has it pretty good, actually. He's got this great dimension, bunch of great games to look at. Maybe that's what I need. Maybe I could get back to his dimension. I just need a good 3DS game about dimensions. 2 out of 3 ain't bad. Okay, so Pac-Man and Galaga Dementia was released by Bandai Namco in order to celebrate the 30th anniversary of Galaga and Pac-Man by trying to convince us that Galaga and Pac-Man's old designs were bad. Yikes. This was the start of a series of games that hinged on the mantra that Pac was back. Nobody told me that he left! While most people associate the new designs with that show, there were actually a few games released with it as well, this being one of them. And as the title implies, this is a collection of multiple games, so looks like today we're playing Pac-Man with a tilt. Guys, this isn't funny. Dan did this joke last month. Originality, do you speak it? Alright, so it's Pac-Man. Uh-huh. As a platformer. Uh-huh. You tilt the system to move. What? And speaking of originality, this game is looking awfully familiar for some reason. Oh no. It can't be. It's Yoshi Topsy-Turvy. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, Yoshi Topsy-Turvy, or Yoshi's Universal Gravitation, she's a whiz, guys, were the extra syllables worth it, was a game released for the Game Boy Advance in 2004. The game primarily focused on you using the built-in gyroscope in the cartridge to tilt the environment and shift obstacles, defeat enemies, and change how Yoshi moves. And as you can guess, this worked really well on the Game Boy player, just ask FrameRaider. It's a novel concept to be sure, but the technology was definitely not ready for this one. There's only 3 directions on this cartridge, left, right, and center, and tilting the environment causes multiple structural issues. See, that's the thing with gravity-based platformers. In order to make your game work properly, You have to make sure the characters can land and move around on edges properly. If you can't do that, then the characters can end up moving around very awkwardly and fall off of things expectedly. But that's my exact problem with Yoshi Topsy Turvy. It's very easy to fall off of ledges because the gravity changes aren't accounted for. Oh, and here's Pac-Man Tilt having the same problem nearly 10 years later. Why? It's like Yoshi Topsy Turvy and Sonic Spinball had a baby, and I mean that in the worst way possible. Multiple parts of the level design feel like they're copied straight from Sonic, and that is not a good thing if you don't have rock-solid momentum physics. Pac-Man turns into a ball when the 3DS is tilted far enough in the direction that he's moving. If he isn't moving fast enough, he won't roll and will instead just hit a wall and make you feel stupid. But I'm the one playing Pac-Man Tilt in 2020, so honestly I don't know who the smarter one is here. The big shame is that all the other games in the package are pretty solid. The original Pac-Man and Galaga on the 3DS, as well as Galaga Legions and Pac-Man Championship Edition in 3D, man this is so cool. Not to mention that there's a brand new Galaga game in the package as well. Basically it's Galaga. As a first-person shooter. You tilt the system to move. Every time! So yeah, Pac-Man and Galaga Dimensions? Pretty okay game in my book, surprisingly. I mean, it's not the greatest, and a lot of the titles in it feel kinda tacked on, but hey, at least we can say it's not Yoshi Topsy Turvy. Whoa, jeez! Dude, it's pronounced Yoshi's Universal Gravitation. Oh, shut up and wait for the transition.